John Parker had always envisioned a simple life, one that balanced the closeness of family with the satisfaction of running a business. After completing his military service, he started a company in suburban Philadelphia, trusting that hard work would bring success. While he poured his energy into the business, his commitment to his family, his wife Sarah, daughter Emily, and his loyal team was even stronger. Over the years, he built a flourishing business that felt more like an extended family. The employees grew close to one another, bonding beyond the office, and John took pride not just in the company's financial growth, but in the deep sense of community he had nurtured. Employees celebrated milestones together, supported each other in difficult times, and formed bonds that brought John immense joy. One Friday evening, John stood in his quiet office, feeling a sense of pride in the 33 employees who made the company tick and in the smooth teamwork, especially with his wife Sarah managing the finances and his brother Tom handling sales. What he didn't know was that this peace wouldn't last. His train of thought was broken when his office manager, Olivia, popped in to ask if he needed anything for tomorrow's pork roast. John grinned and teased her, asking why she was calling him boss, when, in reality, she ran the place. Olivia smiled, agreeing with him, then asked again if he needed anything else. John assured her Sarah had everything under control. Spotting Sarah nearby, John called out to her, prompting Sarah to playfully ask if he was talking about her. John replied, "Who else would I be talking about?" causing everyone to laugh. He explained that he and Olivia had been debating who the true boss was. Sarah smirked and said, "Everyone knows it's Olivia who runs the show." Olivia chimed in, saying Sarah was the one who called the shots at home. John chuckled and wisely decided not to comment, and Sarah added that things worked better when neither of them wore pants, making everyone burst into laughter. John, with a smile, mentioned how happy he was that they were still in their honeymoon phase after 17 years. Olivia then asked if anything was needed for the next day's event. Sarah confirmed everything was set and asked how many people were coming. Olivia replied, 28 employees, 26 family members, and 31 kids. Sarah reassured them there would be more than enough food. She then turned to Olivia, asking if she was bringing anyone. Olivia smiled but said she'd be attending solo. Sarah suggested introducing her to someone, but Olivia, with a more serious tone, asked her not to. John intervened, telling Sarah to let Olivia be, reassuring her that Olivia was fine on her own. Sarah apologized, saying her suggestion came from a place of love, and Olivia, though appreciating it, kept her feelings to herself. Later, as John and Sarah walked to the car, ready to enjoy their usual Friday night, John asked if Sarah had made the dinner reservation. She confirmed and listed the dishes she had ordered: Mongolian beef for John, General Tso's chicken for Emily, and a seafood platter for herself. As they drove home, Sarah noticed John had grown quiet and asked if something was bothering him. John hesitated before admitting that, although life was great, he was starting to realize how quickly Emily was growing up. Soon, it would just be the two of them, with Emily going on her own date nights and eventually heading off to college. Sarah reassured him that Emily would always be their little girl, but John sighed, acknowledging the inevitable truth that kids grow up, even if it made him sad. Trying to lift his spirits, Sarah suggested turning their Friday nights into Chinese movie nights, just the two of them. John smiled at the idea, feeling a bit better. When they arrived home, their daughter Emily rushed to greet John with a big hug, full of excitement. Their dog, Max, barked happily and sniffed the food bags that had been dropped. Emily proudly announced that she had received an A on her geometry exam. John smiled and reminded her that he had told her not to worry. Emily admitted she hadn't believed him but kissed him on the cheek in gratitude. Sarah watched the exchange, feeling proud of Emily's strong bond with her father, which reminded her of her own relationship with her late father. The family enjoyed a lively dinner conversation, and afterward, they moved to the family room. As John settled onto the couch, he asked whose turn it was to pick the movie. Emily quickly claimed the right and chose Robin Hood, Men in Tights, an older comedy that John had mentioned before. John chuckled, joking about the movie being old, and teased her for not picking the next John Wick installment. Sarah stepped in, playfully declaring that no more action movies were allowed tonight. Emily laughed, recalling that she lost track of the body count in the last film after 100 but reassured them that tonight's choice would be fun. They settled in on the couch, John in the middle with Emily and Sarah on either side. As they relaxed, John couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was growing up too fast, and the thought of her eventually leaving home filled him with unease. The next morning, John's brother Tom and his wife Laura arrived early to help prepare for the gathering. While Laura and Emily worked inside, John, Sarah, and Tom handled the outdoor tasks. While cleaning the pool, John felt a familiar rumble in his stomach and decided to head inside. He called out to Sarah that he needed to use the bathroom. Sarah jokingly warned him not to stink up the guest powder room, which Emily had just cleaned. John opted for the basement bathroom instead, appreciating the quiet and darkness, which allowed his mind to wander. As he settled in, he overheard a conversation from outside the small window. He recognized Sarah's voice, speaking nervously to Tom. She expressed concern that John might overhear them, but Tom reassured her that he was busy. John's heart sank as he listened, dread building with each word. Sarah revealed that their boys had brought home forms for a DNA test and asked if Emily's school had done the same. Tom said he hadn't heard anything about it. Then Tom asked the question that hit John like a punch to the gut. Had Sarah ever found out if he was Emily's biological father? Sarah admitted she had been avoiding it, but promised to check with the school. Tom hesitated and then asked if they should stop their affair, acknowledging the risk they were taking. Sarah firmly rejected the idea, insisting they had gotten away with it for years and didn't want John to find out, as it would ruin them both. Tom suggested starting fresh, but Sarah angrily called him a jerk and confirmed their next meeting on Tuesday at 6 o'clock at Valley View. They parted ways, leaving John in stunned silence, his world shattering before him. Emily was the first to greet John, immediately noticing his distress. She asked what was wrong, and John quickly covered, claiming that his stomach was upset and he needed to pull over. He asked her to move the ice to the freezer and explained that he needed to lie down. Concerned, Emily agreed, promising to tell Sarah. John hoped that a few hours alone would help him regain some control. When Sarah checked on him, he told her he was dealing with stomach cramps and vomiting but no fever. She expressed sympathy, telling him to rest and assuring him that everyone would understand if he chose to skip the party. Left to his own devices, John paced around, deep in thought. His mind was made up. Divorce seemed inevitable, and both Tom and Sarah would be fired. He thought about the financial ramifications and the impact on Laura, the boys, and his parents, but his biggest fear was losing Emily. He dreaded the thought of being separated from her, even though she wasn't his biological child. As he tried to compose himself, Emily came upstairs. John pretended to be asleep, feeling her soft touch on his hair. She asked if he was okay, and he quietly said he just needed to rest before the guests arrived. Max, the dog, jumped onto the bed and licked his face, unknowingly wiping away the tears. Emily smiled, saying she had brought him a friend and that she loved him. She kissed his forehead, and in that moment, John felt her love and knew he had made the right decision. He realized Emily deserved to know the truth before things escalated further. Although he hated that it was necessary, he found it hard to understand what Sarah and Tom were thinking. He couldn't fathom their betrayal. He knew that soon, he would expose their lies and shatter the perfect life he thought he had. Bitterness surged through him as he thought, damn them. Despite the emotional turmoil, John managed to stay sociable with the guests. Sarah and Tom were too preoccupied to engage with him, which was a relief. Olivia sensed that something was off but said nothing. John kept Emily close, drawing strength from her presence. She assumed his need for closeness was due to his illness, helping him maintain his cover. After assisting with the cleanup, John told everyone he was heading to bed early, offering the guest room as an excuse. Sarah accepted this without question. John felt a sense of relief, knowing his plan for the first night had gone smoothly. The next morning, the family went to church together. During the service, John pretended to receive a text, catching Sarah's attention. She gave him a curious look, but he whispered, "Later," After the service, Sarah asked about the message. John explained that the owner of Gupta Water Equipment needed him for a Monday meeting and that he'd be back by Tuesday. When Sarah asked where he was going, John answered, Pittsburgh. He added that he'd leave that afternoon to get enough rest. Sarah then asked if they were still going to his parents' house for lunch. John confirmed but mentioned he would drive separately so that Sarah and Emily could stay longer. John felt a quiet satisfaction as everything seemed to be falling into place. He avoided any direct interaction with Tom during brunch, and Sarah, preoccupied with other things, didn't notice his emotional withdrawal. After lunch, John left, stopped by the house to grab some paperwork, and checked into a hotel near their business. Once settled, he called his attorney, George, who was also a close friend. John explained the situation to George, who had been through a similar divorce. Although George wasn't a family lawyer, he recommended Jessica, a colleague who specialized in such cases. George called Jessica, and she agreed to meet them for dinner. At dinner, John learned that George and Jessica were engaged. They spent the evening discussing the divorce strategy, and Jessica scheduled a meeting for Monday to finalize the details. It seemed that by Friday, John would be ready to serve Sarah with divorce papers. At one point, John stepped outside to make a call home, pretending he was already in Pittsburgh. Sarah answered, asking how he was feeling. John said he was a bit tired but fine, then asked if Emily was there. Sarah confirmed she was watching TV nearby. John asked to be put on speakerphone, and Emily eagerly told him she missed him. John reassured her he would be home for their date on Tuesday, and Emily's face lit up, saying she'd pick a movie for them. After their goodbyes, Sarah felt a slight pang of hurt from the brief conversation but chalked it up to John being exhausted from the long drive. In his hotel room, John opened the window, hoping for some fresh air, but was met with the unpleasant odor of dumpsters. Just perfect, he thought, reflecting on the mess his life had become. He shut the window, spending the night battling with his thoughts. The next day, the meeting with George and Jessica went well. That evening, John made another brief call home, claiming he was having dinner with clients. In truth, he was alone in his hotel room, mentally preparing for the next day, when he would have to explain everything to Emily. He knew it would force her to grow up too quickly, a conversation he dreaded with every fiber of his being. On Tuesday morning, John finalized his strategy, meeting with his attorney to handle company-related matters and the severance packages for Sarah and Tom. After lunch, he returned to the office, pretending he had just come back from Pittsburgh. Seeing Olivia stirred emotions he thought he had buried. Instead of going directly to his office, he awkwardly smiled at her and then closed the door behind him. Get a grip, he muttered to himself. He reviewed his plans, took a deep breath, and called Olivia into his office. "Hi, John," she greeted him, but her smile faded when she saw the tear-streaked expression on his face. Without hesitation, she rushed over to hug him. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "No," he replied shakily. "I'm not sick, but something's really messed up." Olivia pulled up a chair and took his hand. "What's going on? Is it Sarah?" she asked, reading the pain in his eyes. He nodded, struggling to find the words. "Tom," he finally whispered. "Your brother?" she asked in shock. She paced the room, her anger rising before she calmed herself to hug him again. "You found out before the party, didn't you?" John nodded and explained how he overheard their conversation and pieced together the truth. "Is there any chance you'll stay with her?" Olivia asked. "They've been involved for 16 years, John replied. "I just can't get past it." Olivia poured them both a rum and coke. After a few sips, they shifted the conversation to business. "Tom and Sarah will be fired after Friday. I want Laura to take over Sarah's position, but I'll need you to cover for her temporarily." "I can handle it," Olivia reassured him. "For sales, I'm considering promoting Kathy Adams. She's shown interest, and I think she'd do well." "I agree," Olivia said. "Rachel Brown could replace Kathy. This is good. On Friday, let them know we'll meet Monday to discuss their promotions. Could you also draft up job descriptions before then?" "Of course. Anything else?" Tears welled up in John's eyes. You're one of my closest friends, and I'm losing Sarah, the person I've always relied on. I might need to lean on you more than I thought." Olivia wrapped him in a tight hug. "It's my privilege." After leaving the office, Olivia's heart ached for John, knowing he didn't deserve the pain he was going through. The following morning, Sarah paced around the kitchen, consumed by guilt over her choices. She hadn't been with Tom in almost a year, and she couldn't understand why she'd ever gotten involved with him in the first place. Determined to end the affair for good, she told herself that Tom wouldn't expose their secret because he had too much at stake. But as she lost herself in these thoughts, John walked in. She threw herself into his arms, kissing him. Surprised, John asked, "What's brought this on?" Sarah answered that she loved him and had missed him since the picnic. John, lying, said he missed her too, all while silently wondering how she'd react if he asked about Tom. When Sarah asked about his plans with Emily, John explained that they were going to Vincent for Italian food and then a movie. Sarah then inquired if he had any plans for the evening. John, sensing something was off, asked why, and Sarah flinched ever so slightly before saying she was going shopping at the mall. John teased her about doing some window shopping, and Sarah forced a smile, replying she might see if anything caught her eye. He added, "Shop safely," and immediately regretted the words when Sarah looked at him, questioning what he meant. He quickly brushed it off as a joke, noticing her discomfort. Thankfully, Emily came downstairs just then, breaking the tension. She greeted John with excitement, and they talked about their plans. As they left, Sarah felt a whirlwind of emotions: pride, love, guilt, and regret, and decided that tonight would be the last time she would meet with Tom. After waiting for 20 minutes, Sarah grabbed her keys and left to meet him. Meanwhile, as John and Emily drove away, he could feel the anxiety creeping in. He took deep breaths, holding Emily's hand, and apologized for the sudden change of plans. Emily, concerned, asked what was going on. John explained that they wouldn't have a fancy dinner or see a movie. Instead, they had something important to discuss. Emily, slightly worried, asked if it was a secret from her mom. John reassured her, asking for a little patience until they weren't in the car anymore. They drove in silence until they reached Chick-fil-A, grabbed some food, and then headed to a small office complex near the Valley View Motel. "Why are we here?" Emily asked. John hesitated before finally revealing that Sarah was having an affair and would be meeting her lover there soon. Emily was in shock and refused to believe it. John sadly confirmed the truth, and they both watched as two cars pulled into the motel parking lot. Emily saw her mom's car and then witnessed Uncle Tom stepping out, walking into the motel with Sarah. Both John and Emily, devastated, hugged each other as they snapped pictures of the scene. They watched as Sarah and Tom embraced before entering a motel room together. John apologized to Emily, who, through her tears, realized the magnitude of the situation. She vowed to stay with her father, rejecting her mother. John promised to do whatever it took to keep her by his side. Emily, filled with anger, declared that if she was forced to stay with her mother, she would make her life as miserable as possible. John knew it wasn't the time to push her to see things differently with Sarah. He warned Emily that the hardest part was still to come and that they would need to act normal until he confronted Sarah on Friday. Emily, overwhelmed by the gravity of everything, expressed doubt about being able to do it, but John reassured her that they would face it together. They left the motel and found a quiet place to talk. John drove to a secluded picnic area in a nearby park, where they spent the evening talking, planning, crying, and venting their frustrations. The experience brought them closer than ever, and in that moment, it felt as though it was just the two of them against the world. They returned home just after 10 p.m., but Emily wasn't sure how she would manage to act normal over the next 3 days. "Daddy, I don't know how I can see her without wanting to slap her," Emily admitted. "Watch your language, honey," John gently reminded her. "You may not want to hear this, but eventually you'll need to maintain some kind of relationship with her. It'll never be the same, but you'll have to figure out how to cope." "I won't respect her," Emily replied bitterly. "Let's stick to the plan for now," John suggested. "When we get home, Just say you're tired and head straight to bed. Okay? I can do that, Emily agreed. After a pause, she added, Daddy, I really love you. I don't know how you're handling all this, but I'm here for you. John smiled as they pulled into the driveway. How did I get so lucky to have such an amazing daughter? He said, his voice thick with emotion. You're not a slacker, Daddy. You're the best man I know, and the best dad a girl could ask for. They quietly entered the house, relieved to find Sarah already in bed. Emily kept her emotions in check, while John knew that Sarah was pretending to sleep, knowing full well where she had been. They were grateful for the absence of any confrontation. They lay in bed, back to back, both lost in their own painful thoughts, silent tears slipping down their faces. The next morning, John woke up to the smell of coffee and got dressed for his trip. He checked on Emily, who was ready in the kitchen. Sarah was making pancakes and greeted him cheerfully. John hugged her and kissed her neck just as he normally would. Emily entered and greeted her parents, playing along with the charade. John casually asked Emily if she had slept well after her date with that hot guy. Emily confirmed and then turned to Sarah, asking if she had talked to her about their plans. Sarah looked confused, so John explained that he needed to go back to Pittsburgh and that Emily wanted to join him. Sarah agreed, saying that Emily would make the trip more enjoyable. They quickly finished breakfast and were soon on the road, relieved to be away from the house. On the way, Emily asked how she had done with her performance. John reassured her that she did great, adding that her idea to come along was a smart one. Emily joked about her bad acting, and John chuckled. After a moment, Emily asked if John had thought about her being present when he confronted Sarah. John wasn't sure yet, but Emily insisted that she wanted to be there when he confronted Tom, too. John gently reminded her about her language, to which Emily responded that the situation definitely deserved it. John, admiring her strength, asked what she would say if she were there. Emily wasn't sure but said she wanted her mom to know she couldn't hide from her anymore and that she was on her father's side. They checked into a hotel, and as they rode up in the elevator, Emily quietly asked when the affair had started. John said he didn't know exactly, but it had been going on for a long time. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, and she began to ask another question. But John gently interrupted, assuring her that whatever the answer was, it wouldn't change anything between them. They walked to their room in silence. Once inside, Emily asked if John wanted to know everything. John wasn't sure and asked if she wanted to. Emily, with a trembling voice, said that she knew who her dad was but thought it was wise to find out. She added that she didn't know if she could handle knowing that both of her parents had cheated. John softly asked if she wanted to know, and Emily admitted that she did. John suggested they wait a few months to find out more, explaining that he had reasons for holding off for now. Emily hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes, and they began unpacking in silence, finding comfort in one another's presence. During their stay at the hotel, John and Emily kept in touch frequently, especially when John was meeting with lawyers or handling business matters. Emily spent her time by the pool, either swimming or reading. On the first day, Olivia joined them to discuss the strategy moving forward, and they later had dinner together. Emily and Olivia got along well, and back in the room, Emily opened up to John. Hesitantly, Emily mentioned that Olivia had feelings for him, leaving John surprised. When Emily asked if anything had happened between them, John was shocked and reassured her that he had never even come close to cheating on her mother. Emily, tearful, apologized for doubting him, and John reassured her that her questions were natural given the situation. They both found themselves wondering why Sarah had been unfaithful, hoping to find some kind of explanation. The next morning, Friday, Olivia called Sarah to discuss work matters. She asked about the month-end closing and mentioned that the IT guy needed Sarah's laptop for updates and a virus check. Sarah confirmed she'd be at the office all day and agreed to have lunch with Olivia, who felt a mixture of relief and sadness, knowing the confrontation was coming. Later that morning, Emily found John staring out the window, tears in his eyes. When she asked if he was okay, John admitted that he wasn't. He then asked if she was ready for what promised to be a tough day. Emily sighed, acknowledging that they had no choice but to face it. John asked if she thought she could ever forgive Sarah and stay. Emily admitted that she couldn't see her mother the same way after all the lies. They shared a long hug, drawing strength from one another, with Emily expressing her gratitude for being included in the process. Touched by Emily's maturity, John asked if she was okay with everything. She responded that she was, as long as he was okay. They exchanged a small, reassuring smile before preparing for the day. After breakfast, they packed up, checked out of the hotel, and headed to the lawyer's office. George and Jessica were already there, impressed by Emily's composure during the discussions about the divorce. Emily actively participated, offering thoughtful suggestions. Jessica commented on how well Emily was handling the situation and even mentioned that Emily might want to consider law as a career, given her interest in legal dramas. Emily was enthusiastic about the idea, and Jessica encouraged her to think about joining their team one day. Watching Emily interact with the lawyers reassured John, who knew she was strong enough to face whatever came next. After lunch, John and Emily ran errands, returning home around 3:30 p.m. The weight of the upcoming confrontation loomed over them, and the silence between them only made it more intense. John laid the evidence out on the dining room table and suggested they play a game of cribbage to pass the time. They had about an hour before everything would change. The sound of the garage door opening marked the arrival of the moment they'd been dreading. Emily and John sat at the table, no more pretending. Sarah walked in, cheerfully announcing, "The Chinese food is here. Let's start the party." But then she saw their serious, grim faces, and the weight of the situation hit her. "Hey, what's going on?" Sarah asked, approaching the table. John's response was calm yet firm. "Sit down." Sarah hesitated, but eventually took a seat, noticing the photo from her meeting with Tom on the table. She gasped in shock, almost missing the chair as tears filled her eyes, and she whispered, "No, no, no." She looked up to find John and Emily staring at her, their expressions filled with contempt. "Please, John, don't do this," Sarah pleaded, her voice cracking. John paused, then asked softly, "What do you think you deserve?" "Please don't leave me," Sarah begged, her voice desperate. "Don't leave you? Like you threw away our marriage and family?" John responded, his voice controlled but bitter. "It was a terrible mistake," Sarah cried, her words shaky. "How long did this mistake last?" John asked sharply. Sarah hesitated, unsure how much he knew. "It doesn't matter. One time was too many. Can't we just move past it?" Sarah implored, her voice hopeful but strained. "Are you serious? How long?" John demanded. Finally, Sarah broke down, admitting, "Since before he met Laura, so about 17 years. John's voice grew colder with bitterness. "You cheated for 17 years, and you think that doesn't matter? It matters. It was selfish and hurtful." Sarah lowered her gaze, unable to meet his eyes. Emily, unable to keep her anger in check, burst out, "Mom, how could you do this? You've ruined Dad and me." John stood abruptly, his anger boiling over. "Who the hell are you?" he snapped. Emily, furious, added, "Yeah, let's see. Liar, cheater, traitor, and a witch." Sarah, overwhelmed, looked to John for support. "Please, John, tell her not to call me names," she begged. John's response was icy. "When she says something untrue, I will." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by Sarah's quiet sobs. After a few moments, Sarah asked, "What are you going to do? Go to your room, clean yourself up, and calm down. Your crying is just making us angrier. We'll talk before Emily and I leave, but we need to fix this," John said, his voice harsh. "Where are you going?" Sarah asked, panic creeping into her voice. "That's not your concern, and we won't fix anything in a few hours. Go upstairs," John ordered. Sarah staggered up the stairs. As planned, John sent a text to Sarah's sister Kimberly. "All set. She'll need you. Be here in 30. "Got it," Kimberly replied. Sarah sat on the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. After a while, she began to think of ways to salvage her family, but then the harsh reality hit her. This would no longer be her bed. She had ruined everything, all for nothing. Fresh tears flowed as she realized the full extent of what she had done. 20 minutes later, Sarah returned downstairs, still upset but more composed. John started bluntly, "First, you know you're fired, right?" Sarah's tears began again. "Why? I'm good at my job," she protested. "Do you really need to ask? I don't trust you anymore, and I don't want you around," John responded coldly. Sarah lowered her eyes, trying to keep her emotions in check. "What else?" John handed her a stack of papers, explaining that they included the documents she was expecting, along with her severance check and the agreement. He told her to open a separate bank account and review the paperwork, suggesting she hire an attorney. He offered to cover initial costs but made it clear that if she decided to fight, she would be responsible for the expenses. Trembling, Sarah said the situation felt too harsh and asked if they could try to fix things. John ignored her plea, telling her that Kimberly would be arriving soon to support her. He suggested she go with Kimberly for a while because he wasn't ready to talk. He added that when they were both ready, she could return and stay in the guest room until permanent arrangements were made. Desperation crept into Sarah's voice as she asked if she could stay. John, losing his patience, snapped that he didn't want to see her face for a while. His words cut deep. Sarah paused, then asked if there was really no chance for reconciliation. John, with finality, said he didn't see a way out, citing the 17 years she had spent with his brother and how she had destroyed 2 marriages and torn apart 3 families. Sarah, almost in disbelief, asked, "3?" John confirmed, explaining it wasn't just their marriage and Laura and Tom's, but also his parents, as his brother was now dead to him. The gravity of her actions sank in, and Sarah murmured, "For God's forgiveness." John acknowledged that while God might forgive Sarah, he wasn't sure if he ever would, but perhaps in time, he might be able to. Just as he finished speaking, Kimberly arrived. John embraced her briefly before calling Emily from her room as he prepared to leave. His gaze briefly met Sarah's, and in that shared look, they both saw the pain that mirrored in each other's eyes. The 18-year bond that had once tied them together had now been cruelly severed, and it was unclear if or when that wound would ever heal. John and Emily drove in silence, both aware of the plan but unsure of whether they were truly ready for what lay ahead. Initially, John had considered savoring the moment, perhaps finding solace in the small details. But he quickly realized how painful it would be, especially for his parents, who were already at Laura and Tom's house for dinner. As they pulled into the driveway, his heart raced, but Emily squeezed his hand and said, "Dad, we'll get through this. Stay close to your grandparents and give them the picture when I hand it to Laura." "I've got it," Emily replied with confidence. They entered the house just as dinner was finishing. Emily hugged her grandparents, and Laura greeted John with a smile. Guis. "We weren't expecting you, but there's plenty of food." John kissed Laura on the forehead, thanked her, and said they needed to talk. He handed her a photo of Tom and Sarah together while Emily gave the same to their grandparents. The room fell silent, filled with gasps as everyone processed what they were seeing. John then turned to Tom, handing him his copy of the photo and demanding an explanation. Tom turned pale, slumping into a chair. Their father, unable to contain his anger, demanded answers. Laura slapped Tom across the face, cursing him. John stepped in, urging her to let Tom speak, but Tom only stammered, unable to defend his actions. When he asked where the picture came from, John sharply responded, "That's the wrong question. You need to admit the truth." Laura begged for an explanation, and John revealed that Tom and Sarah had been having an affair for years, since before Laura even met Tom. Laura exploded in rage, attacking Tom until she collapsed into tears and fled to the living room, where her mother and Emily comforted her. Their father confronted Tom, demanding confirmation of the affair, and Tom, tearfully, admitted it was true. Their father, disgusted, called Tom a disgrace for betraying both his brother and his wife. Tom tried to apologize, but John cut him off, declaring that Tom was dead to him and that he didn't want to see him again. He also informed Tom that he was fired and told their father he no longer considered Tom his brother. Their father tried to calm John, but John remained firm. He told him that if Tom was around, he would leave. If it happened again, their father would have to make a choice. Their father sighed, acknowledging John's stance, but asked that he not be expected to completely cut off Tom. John accepted but warned that things wouldn't be easily fixed. Laura returned to the room, shouting at Tom to get out and pack his things, a demand echoed by their father, who told Tom not to think about staying with them. Tom, tearful, glanced at his mother but saw only contempt in her eyes. As Tom began to gather his things, John stopped him, demanding his office keys. He also told Tom to report to George Turner on Monday to turn in his company car and receive his severance package. John took Tom's computer as well, causing Tom to panic. Tom protested, claiming he had personal files on the computer, but John insisted it was company property and that any personal items would be returned on Monday. In his panic, Tom lunged at John and threw a punch. John retaliated, knocking Tom to the floor. The room erupted into chaos as others tried to intervene, but their father finally calmed John down with a bear hug. As they stood together, Tom lay semi-conscious on the floor, defeated. Once John regained his composure, he apologized to Laura for dropping this bombshell on her and asked if they could talk privately over the weekend. Laura, still reeling, agreed reluctantly. John then turned to his parents, apologizing to them as well. His mother gently assured him that they understood and would talk later. John agreed, then turned to Emily and asked if she was ready to go home. Emily stood by his side, ready to leave. Before they left, John asked his father if he and his mother would stay to help Laura and ensure that Tom left quietly. His father nodded and reassured him they would handle it. John, resigned, remarked that it was just him and Emily now. His father reassured him, saying, "We're still here for you, too." John and Emily left in silence. While John regretted the scene they had caused, he felt some relief from the anger that had been bubbling inside him. But soon, another thought occupied his mind, and Emily noticed it too. Why was Uncle Tom so protective of his computer bag? "What's in there?" she asked, a concerned look in her eyes. "I'm wondering the same thing," John replied. "Let's go home and find out." "Daddy, are you okay? You seemed out of control," Emily said, her concern clear in her voice. "I'm fine, just sore," John replied with a forced chuckle. "I was worried you might hurt Grandpa when he tried to stop you," Emily admitted. "I guess I was more than out of control, huh?" John said, reflecting on his actions. "Definitely, but it probably felt good," Emily said, offering a small smile. They shared a knowing look, both aware of the tension, but also the bond that had held them together through everything. Meanwhile, Tom packed his belongings into suitcases and trash bags, seething with anger over the exposure of his affair and the fact that John had taken his computer bag. He made sure to load a lockbox into one of his suitcases, knowing he'd need the contents soon. Without saying goodbye, he left, driving north, planning to disappear. His destination was unclear, but he hoped to find a small town in Wyoming or Idaho, rent a place with cash, and ditch his car further west. He considered stealing a car or taking a bus or train to avoid detection. Without access to the files on his computer, Tom felt lost. How did everything go to hell so fast? He muttered angrily, unaware that in his panic, he had overlooked two crucial details. Back at home, John and Emily realized they hadn't eaten, so they grabbed fast food. Returning to an empty house, they both felt a strange mix of relief and sadness from Sarah's absence. After dinner, John took Tom's computer bag to his office and began inspecting its contents. At first, everything seemed normal, until he found an envelope from a major client, Sunset Water Systems. Inside was a check made out to Tom's cleaning services for $99,900. Suspecting it was a bribe, John muttered to himself about Tom's shady dealings as he rifled through the papers. Finding nothing else immediately suspicious, he booted up the computer and discovered a hidden file. Recognizing the significance, John immediately called his lawyer friend, George. George, concerned, asked how things had gone. John replied seriously, It went as expected, but I need your help. It's bad. Can you come over? George offered to bring Jessica along, but John said it wasn't necessary, though she was welcome. George arrived 25 minutes later. John showed him the check and the contents of the hidden file. George, examining the evidence, confirmed John's suspicions. This looks like bribery, extortion, and possibly tax evasion, could lead to federal charges. John couldn't shake the heavy weight of the decisions that lay ahead. As he sat with George, he asked with concern, "Do you think the FBI will need to get involved in all this?" George nodded solemnly. "It's likely. If Tom is connected to all these bribes, he could face some serious charges. Jail time's not out of the question." John exhaled slowly, his mind racing. "What do we do now?" George, without missing a beat, stood up and pulled out his phone. "I'll reach out to my contact at the FBI. We need to act fast. If Tom is as unstable as I think, we can't afford to waste any time." After a few minutes, George came back, looking focused. "I've left a message. We're meeting the agent first thing in the morning. You should bring the bag and the check, in case Tom tries to take them back." John nodded. "Good call." As George gathered his things to leave, he grinned and teased. "Looks like you're making a habit of after-hours legal services." "Huh?" John raised an eyebrow, playing along. "What kind of premium are we talking about for that?" George chuckled. "Well, if you're offering, I'll take a bottle of 14-year-old Balvenie single malt." John laughed, feeling a brief moment of lightness amidst the chaos. "Deal. It's been a rough night." Before George left, he paused. "Hold off on giving Tom the severance papers as they are. We can't tip him off just yet. He's got to think everything's normal until we get the FBI involved." John thought for a moment. "What if we make the payout contingent on the reconciliation of expenses?" George smiled. "I like that. Let's do it." John was supposed to meet with Laura and his parents the next day, but a last-minute call from George forced him to change his plans. The meeting with the FBI was scheduled for 10 a.m., and Emily insisted on coming along. "We're in this together, Dad," she said, her voice firm. The next morning, they met Agent Paul Clark, who quickly brought in his supervisor, Brian Lee. After a tense silence, Brian reviewed the evidence, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "So, we've got spreadsheets of bribes, an unpaid check from the latest one, and details of an offshore account. How much is in the account?" Agent Clark, flipping through the papers, replied, "Around $785,000. John confirmed, "That's right. Tom had control over project pricing. He'd keep the margins just above the 23% threshold and took bribes on top of that. And we know of 14 clients involved. They'll be facing charges as well." "Understood," Brian said, his eyes narrowing. "Do you know where Tom is now?" "No," John admitted. "He was supposed to meet George for severance on Monday, but after what happened when I took his computer bag, and with his family kicking him out, I'm guessing he's on the run." Brian immediately turned to Agent Clark. "Paul, track his phone. Let's find him." A few minutes later, Paul reported, "He's heading west on I-80 through Ohio. He's on the move." "All right," Brian said, taking control of the situation. "We'll coordinate with local authorities to arrest him late Sunday. We'll hold him for 48 hours without charges to give us time to prepare a formal case for Monday." As they left the FBI office, John felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Emily, sensing his unease, broke the silence. "Dad, you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," John said, his voice strained. "Just a lot going on." George dropped them off, and they headed straight to Laura and John's parents' house. Laura's tears were immediate as she processed the betrayal. "How could Tom do this?" she cried, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. John's father, equally disgusted, barely contained his anger. "I can't believe my son did this to me." But Laura's concern was for her future and that of her children. "John, what am I going to do? How will we survive without Tom?" Her voice wavered with fear. John took a deep breath, then laid out a plan. "First, you need to get a divorce lawyer. Use Jessica Green, the one I'm working with. If Tom goes to jail, you'll get most of the shared assets. The FBI will return the stolen money, and I'll need some of that to restructure. The rest will go into a trust for you and the boys. And I know you've got a business degree, so I'd like you to take over Sarah's position at the company. You can work from home, still take care of the boys, and manage things at the company. What do you think? Laura hugged John tightly, a wave of relief washing over her. His parents, though upset, nodded their support. John exchanged a proud look with Emily, who had stood quietly by his side, understanding the depth of her father's commitment to the family. As they left the house, John turned to Emily. Have you thought about the DNA test anymore? I've thought about it, Emily said, her tone contemplative. It's hard, but I think we should do it. Are you okay with that? John nodded. I'm not angry and I agree. I'll get the kits this week. You know this doesn't change anything between us, right? I know, Emily said softly. It won't change how I feel about you either. I just need to know. John felt a weight lift as they talked. The road ahead was still tough, but he knew they'd face it together. Meanwhile, Tom, on the run, was making his way westward on Interstate 80, stopping briefly at a McDonald's near the Ohio border to grab breakfast. He scanned his iPad for destinations, ultimately deciding on Sioux Falls, remote enough to blend in, but still large enough to avoid suspicion. He booked a cheap furnished room and planned to ditch his car near Fargo, then take a bus west. The plan was far from foolproof, but he was desperate. I've got a plan, he muttered to himself, but doubts quickly crept in. As he drove, he realized just how flawed his escape was. The fear of being caught intensified, and for a moment he thought about giving up. But the thought of surrender terrified him more than continuing on the run. He drove through the night, forcing himself to stay focused on his anger. Regret, he decided, had no place in this journey. Exhaustion finally forced him to stop at a Cracker Barrel parking lot, where he slept fitfully. By Sunday morning, he was back on the road, but the weight of his actions hung heavily on him. He stopped at a diner near Omaha, still 200 miles from Sioux Falls. As he approached, two men asked, "Are you Tom Parker?" In that instant, he knew. It was over. The FBI had caught up with him. The next morning, John showed up at the office with donuts, coffee, and bagels for the staff. But before that, he met with Kathy Adams and Rachel Brown to officially announce their promotions. The staff, despite the ongoing turmoil, was supportive. John, looking ahead, focused on moving forward with both his business and his personal life. On Tuesday, the news broke. Tom was formally charged with multiple felonies, and the FBI began investigating his clients involved in the bribery. John, already restructuring the business, knew he would lose some customers, but the future of the company was in his hands. He also finalized plans to spin off part of the manufacturing arm and build a new distribution company. Everything was falling into place just in time for Sarah's return. He steeled himself for the challenges ahead. That Friday night, John and Emily had dinner at their favorite Chinese restaurant. Just as they were finishing, John received a call from Sarah, asking if she could come home. His cold, distant response made it clear. Their relationship was irrevocably broken. "I've already hired a lawyer," he said, ending the call abruptly. Emily noticed her dad's tension but remained silently supportive, understanding how hard it all was. Despite the heavy atmosphere, their bond felt stronger than ever as they faced the storm together. The next morning, the tension in the house was palpable. John and Emily were in the living room, but when Sarah entered, Emily immediately turned and ascended the stairs, her back stiff with cold determination. She refused to acknowledge her mother, the silence between them deafening. John, too, felt the weight of the moment. As Sarah walked in, he could feel her eyes on him, filled with resentment. Without turning to face her, he simply continued scrolling through his iPad. "John," Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly as she tried to keep it steady. "Wait," John interrupted, not looking up. He didn't need to hear any of the empty apologies just yet. After a few moments, he set the iPad aside and met her gaze. "Did you read the papers?" he asked flatly. Sarah nodded, her face drawn with anxiety. I did. But can we talk about this? About staying together as a family. She couldn't hide the fear in her voice, a fear of everything unraveling beyond repair. John raised an eyebrow. You mean staying married while you keep doing whatever you want? His words were sharp, and Sarah flinched. That's not what I meant, she insisted quickly. I don't want to lose what we had. We were a family, John. A happy one. I can't bear the thought of it all ending. But John wasn't convinced. He leaned forward slightly, his voice quieter but still carrying a sharp edge. So, after 17 years of betrayal, now you're just scared of the fallout? Is that it? You've spent all this time lying, having fun with my brother while I was oblivious, and now you want to stay together because it's all crumbling? Sarah recoiled, her eyes welling up. I don't even like him, John. I didn't love him. He's selfish, awful, terrible in bed. I never wanted to be with him. John shook his head in disbelief. You risked everything. Your marriage, your family. For 17 years with a man you didn't even like? And for what? You still can't explain it. Sarah collapsed into a sob, shaking her head. I don't know. I really don't know. It was a stupid, selfish mistake. The first time I was drunk. After that, he threatened to tell you if we didn't keep seeing each other. It became a habit, and there was this twisted thrill in getting away with it, but I don't know why I kept doing it. I didn't think. I was a coward. John's expression hardened. He couldn't listen to this anymore. We're done, Sarah, he said, his voice final. I've had enough. Sarah's tears grew more frantic, but John's resolve didn't waver. He softened only slightly, standing up and offering her a moment to collect herself. Do you want some water? He asked, his voice quieter. She whispered, yes. He grabbed a bottle from the fridge, his hands trembling slightly as he handed it to her. He took a moment, then nodded toward the dining room table. When you're ready, we'll go over the papers. Upstairs, Emily sat quietly on her bed, her heart heavy as she listened to her parents. She tried to keep her emotions in check, but the sound of their pain, especially her father's, shattered her. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she wiped it away, hardening her resolve. She knew what she had to do. She would be there for her father, and her mother could live with the consequences of her actions. Downstairs, John walked to the restroom, letting the tears he had been holding back finally spill. His anger was consuming, but so was the ache in his chest. He couldn't let Sarah see him like this, so he tried to gather himself, knowing he had to stay strong. When he returned, he found Sarah slowly walking into the dining room, her face red and swollen from crying. For a moment, John felt a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. She had caused so much pain, but seeing her like this pulled at something deep inside him. He made a decision, no more shouting. He was done with the screaming. I'm sorry for yelling, John said, his voice strained but calm. But I'm not going to keep doing this. Sarah, her voice barely audible, responded. You can yell, curse, or even hit me, if it'll make you stay. But I know it won't. No, it won't, John agreed, his eyes steady. Have you read the papers? Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes red from crying. Yes, I've read them. And they're fair, John. But please, don't give up on us. Emily, hearing the conversation from the hallway, felt a fire ignite inside her. She couldn't listen anymore. In an instant, she stormed into the room, fury blazing in her eyes. Don't give up on you? She spat, her voice thick with anger. How about the last 17 years? The lies? The betrayal? She launched into a tirade, calling Sarah every name she could think of. Every word an accusation. Every sentence a painful reminder of the damage she had done. For over 10 minutes, Emily let it all out, confronting Sarah at every turn. Whenever Sarah tried to turn away or hide, Emily grabbed her chin, forcing her to face the destruction she had caused. John watched, stunned at his daughter's strength. He waited until she began to calm, then gently pulled her back. That's enough, sweetheart, he said softly, pulling her into his arms as she sobbed. He held her, letting her release the anger that had been building for so long. Sarah stood frozen, her body trembling. She spoke through her tears. "Emily, please, I love you. I need you with me." Emily, her voice firm and resolute, shook her head.
No.
"It's not happening. If you make me stay, I will make your life miserable. I will make sure you regret it every single day." Sarah, desperate, whispered, "What happened to calling me Mom?" Emily looked at her mother coldly and said, "You lost that title the moment you chose him over us." With one final look, she turned and walked out of the room, a small smile of satisfaction playing on her lips as she went to her bedroom. Sarah's heart shattered as the reality of her situation hit her. She couldn't stay in this house during the divorce. She wasn't ready to rent a place, not with custody and the house still uncertain. So she packed her things and moved in with her sister for the time being. The divorce was now officially in motion. Judge Alan Morgan, who had reviewed both parties' petitions, had already formed a clear picture of how the case would go. Although he typically recommended counseling in cases like this, the length of Sarah's affair with John's brother left little room for reconciliation. The main issue now was custody of Emily. While the judge usually leaned toward favoring the mother, Emily was almost old enough to decide for herself. It would be a delicate matter to handle in court. At the hearing, Sarah's attorney argued that his client didn't want the divorce and requested mandatory counseling. The judge, unimpressed, dismissed the idea as a waste of resources and time. Then came the issue of custody. The judge cut off the attorney's arguments and decided he needed to speak with Emily privately, inviting her to his office for lunch. Despite Sarah's objections, the judge stood firm, ensuring Emily's safety with a court official. In his office, Judge Harris greeted Emily warmly. He asked her how she was feeling, but Emily remained calm and respectful, maintaining a level of maturity that impressed him. The conversation flowed easily at first, with the judge gently probing to understand her views. When it came time to discuss custody, the judge asked how she felt about the traditional approach of awarding the mother custody. Emily didn't hesitate. "I don't think it's right," she said firmly. "It's not about revenge, Judge. It's about what's best for me. I'm not saying my mother doesn't need help, but I belong with my dad. He's the one who's always been there for me. He's the one who hasn't betrayed me." When the judge tried to play devil's advocate, mentioning that her mother might need her too, Emily explained, "I'm not doing this because I want to hurt her. I'm doing it because it's the right thing for me. And in 3 months I'll be old enough to choose. If I have to go back with her, I'll be in court again. I won't live with her." The judge, clearly impressed by Emily's maturity, joked, "Have you considered a career in law?" Emily smiled and replied, "Maybe. I'm planning to assist on a paralegal team next summer." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I'll make my decision soon. You've got a lot of strength, Emily. Keep that in mind." With a smile, he walked Emily back to her father. After a handshake and a brief exchange, they parted ways, Emily confident that her voice had been heard. The morning after the ruling, Emily found her father in the living room. Her face lit up as she told him that the meeting with the judge had gone well. "We'll know for sure when court resumes," she said, her confidence growing. "Emily," the judge had said during their private conversation, "you've presented yourself well, calm, and professional. Both your parents should be proud of you. I considered your thoughts carefully in my decision." The judge had shown respect for her maturity, making it clear that her input would factor heavily into the outcome. As John and Emily continued to process everything, Sarah suddenly stood up in the courtroom, interrupting the flow of the session. Her lawyer quickly stood beside her, urging to speak up, but the judge's face tightened in irritation. "Counselor, is there an issue?" the judge demanded, his voice cold. The lawyer hesitated. "Apologies, Your Honor. My client believes there's something that might affect your decision." "Go ahead," the judge replied, his patience worn thin. "But it better be significant." Sarah's attorney took a deep breath before revealing, "Mrs. Parker has reason to believe that Mr. John Parker might not be Emily's biological father, and that could have an impact on his custody claim." The courtroom went quiet. The judge looked unfazed as he turned toward Sarah, his gaze firm. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice clipped. "Do you have evidence to back that up, Mrs. Parker?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Not yet, Your Honor." John clenched his jaw, but he didn't flinch. His lawyer, Jessica Green, stood up with a calm certainty. "Your Honor, we were anticipating this, and we've already submitted certified DNA results proving that Mr. Parker is Emily's biological father." She handed the documents to the judge, who acknowledged them before turning to Sarah's attorney. "Thank you, Counselor Green," the judge said, relieved. "This is a relief for both father and daughter. The motion for a stay is hereby denied." Sarah's world seemed to crumble in an instant as she broke down into uncontrollable tears. Her lawyer tried to comfort her, but it was clear the judge had already made his decision. "While primary custody is generally granted to the mother," Judge Harris said, turning to the courtroom, "in this case, I believe it's in Emily's best interest to honor her wishes. I will grant Mr. Parker's petition for custody." A final ruling soon followed. The divorce is granted. Final judgment will be rendered in 6 to 8 weeks. Court is adjourned. As the courtroom emptied, Emily rushed to her father, throwing her arms around him in a tight hug. They walked out of the courtroom together, feeling the weight of the moment. But just as they reached the door, Sarah, her face flushed with fury and pain, approached them. "You won. Are you happy now?" she spat, her anger barely concealed. John's voice was soft, but heavy with exhaustion. "What's happening to you, Sarah? No one's winning here. We've all lost. Go home, and we'll talk later." Sarah crumpled onto a bench, her face twisted in disbelief as her lawyer attempted to comfort her. "But I love you, John. This isn't right," she muttered to herself. John heard her words but didn't look back. Holding Emily close, he walked out of the courthouse and into the next chapter of their lives. In the weeks that followed, the consequences of Tom and Sarah's actions slowly unfolded. Tom, desperate to avoid a lengthy trial, pleaded guilty and revealed hidden assets in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Sarah, on the other hand, moved to a townhouse 25 miles away, where she could still see Emily but far enough from the former life she had destroyed. Meanwhile, John threw himself into restructuring his business. He had big plans for the future. Kathy, now in charge of sales, was thriving. She secured large orders from new clients, keeping the business afloat while retaining most of the clients who had been involved in the bribery scandal. Rachel worked seamlessly alongside her, ensuring smooth operations. John started planning to expand the sales team, with Kathy likely taking the lead. Despite the ongoing changes in his professional life, John found little interest in dating. Emily's friends encouraged him to get back out there, and women from church seemed eager to catch his attention. But John wasn't ready. There were moments when he missed Sarah more than he expected, but he didn't dwell on it. When he thought about the future, only one person crossed his mind. One Wednesday morning, months after the judge's ruling, Olivia walked into John's office holding the day's mail. "Hey, boss. Looks like the divorce papers just came through." John opened the envelope slowly, his fingers brushing the paper. "Yep, right on time. 7 weeks later. I'm officially a free man." Olivia leaned in, her voice soft with curiosity. "How do you feel about that?" John paused, considering his words carefully. "It's complicated. Sadness, happiness, relief, even anxiety. But mostly I feel anticipation. What Sarah and I had. It was special. But now that it's over, I want to find that special feeling again. I don't know if that makes sense." Olivia smiled, her expression thoughtful. "Yeah, I get it." She started to leave but stopped at the door, her face hesitant. "John, I've been holding something in for a while. I've been afraid to say it, but I think you need to know. I love you. I've loved you since the day you interviewed me. You don't have to answer now, but when you're ready, ask me out. I'll say yes." John, taken aback for only a moment, stood and walked toward her. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around her, kissing the back of her neck softly. "Dinner tonight?" he whispered. Olivia, a little surprised by the suddenness of it all, turned to face him. The look in her eyes softened. My place at 6. I'll cook and wear something casual. That evening, the bottle of wine and lasagna disappeared quickly as dinner became an afterthought. They shared a deep, meaningful conversation that soon turned physical, their long-standing friendship blossoming into something more. As the night went on, Olivia whispered to John, "I want to be with you." John smiled, his heart full. "I can think of plenty of reasons for that," he said with a playful grin. Olivia, with mischief in her eyes, pulled away. "Tell me all of them," she teased. With a grin, John agreed, ready to explore the next chapter of their relationship together. For the next 2 weeks, they spent every night together, finding a rhythm in their new relationship. One evening, John whispered that it was time, and without hesitation, he carried her to the bedroom, feeling the weight of his life finally falling into harmony. Later, he confessed his love for her, saying he never wanted this to end. Olivia, smiling, assured him that they had each other now and that she was ready for whatever came next. "If you're sure," she said, "then we'll never part." John smiled, joking, "I'm sure, though it might make walking difficult." Olivia laughed, calling him a smartass, but agreeing that this was right. 6 months later, John and Olivia married at their church, celebrating with a casual pig roast in their backyard. Over 200 guests came, many of them children who played in the pool while the adults danced and relaxed under a marquee. The band played, and the atmosphere was one of joy and celebration. Some people were surprised at how quickly John remarried, especially since Olivia was 8 years younger than him. But they both knew it was the right decision. They were a team. Late in the evening, as the party wound down, Olivia spotted Sarah standing at the edge of the yard. She approached her, unsure of how the encounter would go. Sarah, surprisingly, smiled warmly and embraced her. "Congratulations," she said sincerely. "What a wonderful celebration." Olivia was taken aback but grateful. "Thank you. John's pig roast was a hit." "Huh." Sarah smiled and nodded. "I'm still working on myself, but I'm genuinely happy for you both." John joined them then, giving Sarah a warm hug. "Glad you could make it," he said. "Wish you'd come earlier, though." Sarah explained that she didn't want to steal the spotlight but reiterated she was happy for them. As the conversation shifted to Emily spending 3 weeks with Sarah while John and Olivia were on their honeymoon, Sarah reassured John that she was looking forward to the time with Emily, even if it was difficult. "She feels guilty about some things," Sarah admitted. "But we'll be fine." John nodded, feeling a mixture of emotions. "I hope so," he said softly, turning back to Olivia, who smiled at him knowingly. For the first time in a long while, everything felt right. John chuckled, a rare moment of lightness breaking through the heaviness of the day. "So, are you going to meet my emotional support animal?" he asked, teasingly. Sarah looked confused, not sure whether to be offended or amused. "Emotional support animal?" she repeated. John, grinning, clarified, "Yeah, Max, of course." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You still have him?" John laughed, shaking his head. "No, Max is with Emily, but I was talking about the pig we roasted." He gestured toward the spread. "You should grab a plate." The tension between them dissipated as both women shared a laugh. The moment was surprisingly comfortable, as if some of the past had been momentarily forgotten. They joked briefly about throwing John into the pool, and for a moment, life felt almost normal again. No 2 divorces, no 2 breakups are the same. Everyone reacts differently when their world crumbles. When John first discovered Sarah's affair, he wondered if he'd ever find happiness again. Emily mourned the family she once knew, and Olivia feared a life of loneliness or settling for something less. They were all broken in their own ways. But somehow, against the odds, John, Olivia, and Emily found a deeper joy than they had ever known. And even though everything had shattered, they still wished for healing for Sarah and Laura. Time would tell if that healing would come. 10 years later, the sun shone brightly on the wedding day of John's daughter, Emily. The pastor's voice rang out, asking, "Who gives this woman to be married?" With pride and a smile, John answered firmly, "Her mother and I." He placed Emily's hand in the hand of her groom, Luke Harris, the grandson of Judge Robert Harris, the man who had presided over so many family trials, both in court and in their lives. As John stepped back, he joined Olivia, who was wiping happy tears from her eyes. Sarah, sitting nearby with her fiancé, had come a long way since the tumultuous days of the divorce. She and Olivia had rekindled a friendship, though John, while not hostile, kept his distance from his ex-wife. There were no lingering ill feelings, but time and healing had forged a stronger bond with Olivia. John, now more at peace with everything, looked at his daughter and smiled. Emily had grown into an incredible woman. She had graduated from Temple University Law School at the top of her class, where she had met and fallen in love with Nate. Their relationship blossomed, and through it all, John and Judge Harris had grown close, making the blending of their families feel natural and smooth. Nate had joined George Turner's office, focusing on criminal law, while Emily had chosen family law and worked with Jessica Green's team. John's business had not only survived the storm but thrived. By 48, he and Olivia had set their sights on retiring by the time he turned 55. While they were not billionaires, John's financial planning had positioned them for the future they had dreamed of. Laura, too, had remarried, a wonderful man who managed the Eastern Territory for one of John's company's partners. With him, she had 2 boys from Tom and a young daughter, whom John's parents adored. As for his parents, they had enjoyed their retirement and good health, and their Sunday family dinners had passed to John and Olivia, a tradition that brought them closer together. 3 months after Emily's wedding, John's father, breaking a long-held promise, brought up Tom again. He had learned that Tom, now free after serving time, was planning to leave and wanted to see the family before he left. John sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I've thought about reaching out to him, now that he's out of prison. I heard he's joined a missionary group," John admitted. His father nodded, a look of quiet understanding in his eyes. "He has. Tom's found work in Tanzania as a water purification specialist. He connected with a prison ministry while he was incarcerated." John was surprised. "I didn't know that. I assumed he would disappear without a trace." His father glanced at him, almost as though reading his mind. "He's trying to make amends in his own way. He asked to see you. I think it's time you talked to him." John looked thoughtful. "Maybe, but I can't promise it will be easy. Laura and the boys, they might not be happy with it." His father was reassuring. "They're fine with it. Tom has already visited them, and things are better between them than you know." John was surprised. "Laura hasn't said anything about it." His father gave him a gentle look. "Well, you made it clear you didn't want anything to do with Tom, so she kept it quiet." After a long pause, John considered what his father had said. "I think I owe it to both of us to talk, to clear the air." His father nodded, relieved. "I've been thinking about it," John continued, "about how things have turned out. 10 years ago, I couldn't imagine a future like this. Laura's remarried, my business is doing well, and I've got a family that loves me. Even Tom has changed. He's paid his dues, and I think he's trying to make something good out of his life." His father looked at him with pride. "You've turned everything around, John. That's not easy. What you've done, especially for Emily, it's something to be proud of." John smiled faintly. "I never expected things to turn out this way. It feels like what was broken has actually turned into something better." His father asked, still pondering, "So, you're saying what happened with Tom, with the family falling apart, ended up being a blessing in some ways?" John hesitated but then nodded slowly. "Yeah, in some ways it did. I've had to let go of the past, but I wouldn't change anything. Not with Olivia. Not with our kids." His father studied him for a moment before asking, "Do you love Olivia more than Sarah?" John's response was thoughtful but firm. "I love Olivia differently, but I love her more now, in a way that I couldn't love Sarah after everything that happened. My feelings for Sarah, they're not the same anymore. But I don't regret anything. What matters now is my commitment to Olivia." His father smiled softly, then asked, And what about Tom? How do you feel about him now?
John sighed.
I hate what he did. I can't deny that. But in the end, I'm strangely grateful for how things turned out. Tom has paid the price. 8 years of his life. He's lost so much, and I can't stay angry anymore. I still love him, but I'll never trust him like I did. His father nodded, impressed by his son's ability to see things clearly, even in the face of betrayal. That's a hard place to get to, John. I know, John agreed. But it feels like everything that's happened has led me to where I am now. And where I am is good. Better than I ever expected. As they sat together, John reflected on the past, realizing that while the wounds had been deep, they had healed. His business had grown, his family was strong, and his relationship with Olivia and Emily had never been more solid. Even Tom had found redemption in his own way. With a final glance at his father, John said, I think it's time to talk to him, to finally let go of the past. His father, with a proud smile, agreed. You'll handle it well, son. And with that, John felt a sense of closure, knowing that while the past had shaped him, it no longer controlled him. The future, for the first time in years, felt like it was truly his to shape. The peace he had longed for was finally his.